You may be seated. I'm just going to introduce Simon real quick. Simon is a graduate of FTH and is one of the church planners that we support in Germany. Again, I hope you're able to hear his story about what's going on in Germany and what they're doing with their church plan. If not, it's on YouTube, and we'll send out an email a bit later. But for now, please welcome Simon as he opens God's words for us.
Good morning, St. Dunstan. Thanks for having us here. We enjoy the Florida weather. Good job on that one. And in Germany, it's not that nice right now, so we enjoy the shorts and the linen shirts. It's really nice. I am honored and glad to be able to preach today. That's really, really nice, and I want to thank you ahead for all the support that you as a church are already giving us as a church plant. And as Father Michael just said, more of what's going on, you can look in the live stream, and you will find some things that not just I said, but also my wife, Nela. And we're glad to be here to encompass a little bit or show that the Church of God really is universal and it's global. And that's really nice that we get to celebrate this service together. So to start into the readings that we just heard and the gospel that we heard, I want to share some of my thoughts about this life that we are living, and maybe you can relate to this a little bit. I feel like the life on this earth, the life during these times specifically, a little bit like an action movie. There's a lot going on. There's, I don't know if you have a favorite action movie that you can picture right now, but usually in these action scenes, there's so much that's happening. There's bangs and shots being fired, and then there's flashes and dust everywhere, and you can't really focus in the middle of all this. The viewer, as you are watching this, you have no idea what's going on, and that's exactly the point. You're not supposed to know what's going on. So I don't know if you know this, but they actually, if you stop these frames for a second there, which we now can do when we stream things, so you can stop and you will see that the camera isn't even in focus. Everything is blurry. You're not supposed to see what's going on right now. And then at the end, when everything's said and done and all shots are fired, you will see if the hero survived or not. And maybe our life isn't that heroic or anything and not that dramatic, but at the same time, I feel like there's a lot going on in our lives. And a lot of things are happening all at once. I always say I have too many tabs open in my mind, if you can relate to that better. It's hard to focus on just one thing, and it's hard to make out what it is in this life that really counts and that's worthy of our attention. And these things that draw us in and they fight for our attention in our daily life, it's not like they're not important. They are important things. Like, what, my car broke down, what should I do next? Like, how do I get somebody to fix it, or what car should I buy to replace it with? How is my insurance doing right now? What's for dinner, by the way? And all these things. Like, what if you're a young person, what career should I choose? Is this the right thing that I'm doing? Is this the right path I'm going down? I feel like that's just a little bit of all the questions that are thrown at us really all day long. And those are very practical and things that seem to be really important, and they really are to our daily lives. In this passage that we just read in the gospel, the Sadducees, they come to Jesus with a very serious question that seems to address a very practical problem that's not too small for everyday life, that seems like a really big issue if we look at our lives today. So they propose this concept of levirate marriage, if you're familiar with this, which as they explain, comes from the law of Moses and says that once a husband dies that had a wife but no children, the brother, or really the next to kin, whoever that is in that case, is supposed to marry the late husband's wife in order to have children with her in his name. So there's two things that does. First, it serves as a kind of practical solution to Social Security. So as a wife during that time, you had not really a good way to earn a living. So you were dependent on the males in your life, whoever that was. It was first your father, then your husband, and later your children, your sons. So that serves a very practical problem of insurance, basically. And then there's the other problem that it solves is it gives the late husband some form of afterlife. It's a way to let his name be passed on through his sons, which are not on a DNA level are not his sons, but since the brother serves in his place, they're considered sons of his late brother. So gives him an honor and a continuation of his name. So why do they bring this in front of Jesus all of a sudden, this problem? Well, I think you can tell from the text that Jesus immediately knows that this is a trick question. It seems like a real problem, and if we're honest, it is a practical problem that we could ask ourselves. If maybe you have asked yourself this, maybe you've been married before and you read this text and you think, well, who's going to be my wife in heaven? So that is a practical question. And they come to Jesus with this, but they're really trying to trick him in either giving up his teaching of the resurrection, which is what they are teaching because the Sadducees are only believed in Torah, so the 5 books of Moses, and nothing of the other scriptures. So one of their arguments was that there is no resurrection in Torah, therefore there is no resurrection. So they wanted Jesus to either drop that teaching of resurrection by showing that it's just an absurd idea, which is apparent if you have this one problem of levirate marriage. You take this, for example, and you just see resurrection just does not work. It doesn't work. How should that work logistically? So it's a very down-to-earth problem. And they wanted to drop this or to disagree with the law of Moses and thereby showing that he's really a heretic. It's one of those things that they wanted to do at this point. But Jesus sees right through them, and he answers in a completely different way. He does not satisfy either of those two outcomes of the trick questions. He takes on a different perspective. He says that the things that are concerning us in this life, these practical problems, they will be solved in the next life, in the age to come, but in a totally different way than we think. So he tells them, you have a great argument, but your premise is already wrong. So your whole argument is faulty. Jesus sees more than we do. And that's true for the concept of levirate marriage. That's also true for whatever practical things are going on in your life that seems like huge problems right now. These things that I just talked about that are trying to grab our attention, all the dust that's flying around, the flashes and the bangs, all these things can seem so important. But when it comes to Jesus, he all of a sudden takes a different perspective to it. And I think that's really interesting that Jesus invites us and invites the Sadducees and everyone who's listening to look beyond what is seen before them. Another great example of this is this passage of Job that we just read, and it ties really nice into this. Job is in the middle of his suffering. He has lost everything. He's in pain. He's sick. He's really close to death, honestly. And in the midst of his suffering, to add insult to injury, his friends are starting to confront him, and they tell him, like, I know, Job, you say you did nothing wrong, you didn't sin, but look at the evidence. Look at your life. You're obviously lying to us. There has to be something in your life that's not right with God. And this is your payback. And he says, no, it's not. There's nothing wrong with my life. And so he sits in the middle of this suffering. It's just when he heard another one of those speeches by his friends, and he explains again that he is not guilty of any sin against God, and that this is not a deserved punishment, but just unnecessary suffering. And in the midst of this, at the lowest point, he all of a sudden sees his own reality a lot clearer than before. It's like a moment of clarity that opens up and draws all this dust, blows it all away for a sudden. And he confesses that his Redeemer lives. His Redeemer lives, and he's going to be the one that remains after all this dust is gone, all this flashes and bangs, everything that's going on right now that's wearing Job down. When that's gone, Jesus is going to be what remains, his Redeemer. And he actually says that his Redeemer is going to rise. And here in the English Standard Version that we just read, it says it rises from the earth, or he stands on the earth. In our German translation, it translates the Hebrew a little closer to the actual Hebrew word, and it says he rises from the dust. He rises from the dust. I think that's amazing, this imagery, that this moment of clarity that Job has, and says once this dust has settled, everything is resolved. There's someone who's going to rise out of the dust, and that's the only thing that matters. And he's going to prove that I'm in the right, and I'm going to see him face to face. And then he says, this is what my heart longs for. It faints for this moment. To see everything else resolved and see Jesus face to face. The Redeemer that rises from the dust. And we all really need that kind of Redeemer. For the everyday stuff that trying to keep our attention, grab us, what's throwing us around like a big storm. We need someone who puts an end to this. And once the dust settles, we'll see that he is the one thing that remains. Now, to come back to the concept of Levirate marriage, which is interesting, because Levirate marriage involved someone who had to solve a very practical problem, and someone who had to provide for an afterlife for a deceased one. And the name that this person received was Goel, which means Redeemer. It's the same term that is used in the story of Ruth and Boaz in the Old Testament, where Boaz is the Redeemer of Ruth. And he solves her practical problem in this very moment, but also solves the problem of the afterlife. So we see when we call Jesus our Redeemer, it's a lot more than what we can see in this role in Levirate marriage. It's but a shadow, really. It's a practical problem to, if we're honest, a broken world. A practical problem to a broken world, but Jesus is going to put an end to this. He's going to be the true Redeemer. He's going to give us a real afterlife. He's going to give us real life. He's going to really resolve all the issues that we think are so important right now. And that's what Jesus answers to the Sadducees. He says, look beyond what you can see right now. Maybe there's an illustration needed here. So being in Florida, I went fishing the other day with Jimmy, and it got me thinking that fish really don't know what's out there beyond the sea. They live their life in the water, underneath the surface. And it's hard probably for them to imagine that there's something else out there where all the food and the hooks come from. So sometimes they may get a glimpse by when they jump out of the water, but they will realize quickly that they don't have the lungs to breathe that air. And once fish leave the water, I don't know if you know this, but their eyes cannot see clearly outside of the water. They're made for inside the water. So it's hard for them to focus, probably. It's hard for them to see this reality beyond their surface that they've never lived in. It's not hard for us to imagine this world, but for them it's probably really hard to explain. And I think we are a little bit like fish when it comes to Jesus. There is something out there that Jesus tells us about. There's a whole different life. There's a whole different world and a whole different age to come. And we can't see it clearly. We get glimpses every once and then, but it's hard for us to focus on this. Yet he calls us to do exactly this. Not focus on everything that's going on around us, all the dust that's thrown up by this earth and this world that we live in, but focus on him. Believe him that there is really an afterlife. And I think he made it a little bit easier for us by coming into our world, becoming one of us. So when we look at the face of this man, who's also God, that we can see the face of God and see a little bit of what's to come for us. That's exactly what St. Paul calls the Corinthians to do in his second letter to the Corinthians. And I want to read from that to close this. Chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. And Paul says, "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentarily affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." Amen.